Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar. We're glad you could join us. I'm Brad Eby, Client Account Executive here at Sophion. Today's webinar is the third part of our webinar series under the banner Innovating Through Disruption, which shares how consumer goods leaders that Sophion is working with are adapting in the face of digital disruption and fast-changing consumer preferences. I am joined today by Brian Seyfarth and Arvo Lepicep. Brian leads the consumer goods segment at Sophion. He's an expert on product development process optimization for consumer goods manufacturers. And he's advised companies throughout the world on innovation best practices and ways to improve new product development output and financial success. And Arvo is a senior solution consultant here at Sophion. He provides innovation, product, business consulting expertise for Sophion's consumer goods customers. I'm Brad Eby. I'm with the consumer goods group here, and I help our consumer goods companies to leverage technology to help to improve their new product development performance and efficiencies. Today's webinar, we're going to cover three main themes here: how consumer firms are leveraging new agile-like, highly visual methods of investment decision-making. We'll share real-world example strategies to streamline the cross-functional business layer of the product lifecycle. And we'll provide you with some tips to drive adoption and to show what's in it for me through the system-wide cross-functional efficiencies for team members and team leaders. We'll start out with Brian. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Brad. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Nice to be with you today. I'm going to begin our session by discussing this topic, which was a theme that ran throughout each of the previous webinars in this series, and that is about how consumer firms are leveraging new agile-like visual methods of investment decision-making. And if we step back for a moment and look at what is driving that for so many of today's CPG companies, it is pressure. This slide is a way to illustrate all of the pressures that CPG firms and their business leaders were facing prior even to COVID and the pandemic, which of course just makes it even more challenging of an environment. But already the companies that we talked to in the CPG space were facing pressures of digitalization, being disrupted by smaller companies, challenger type of companies, and of course the ever-present changes in consumer needs and preferences, which is one of the reasons why they've realized they needed to do something different. And that was driving many of them to move more quickly, more efficiently from an innovation and product development standpoint, and to leverage principles of agile processes as much as they are able to incorporate that into their product development decision-making process. A key part of that is this concept of much more quick and visual methods to support their investment decision-making. And I'm just going to give a couple of examples calling back from our previous webinars. If we think about what we learned from the webinar from Jeff George, Hanes Celestial, one of the things that he talked about is this concept of a project on a page that they use to drive and to focus the decision-making for their executive team. This was something that they created as a method to ensure that executives had the right decisions or the right data to drive their decisions, at the same time not to be overwhelming, not to slow down their process to drive unnecessary levels of detail that weren't necessary to support that. So for those of you that saw that webinar, you may recall he talked about these project on a page formats that included information about consumer need, about financial risk and reward, about technical and operational feasibility and timeline. And what that allowed them to do is in a very efficient way to ensure that their executive teams were focused on the things that need to be true about a project in order to ultimately be successful. We're going to talk about how to make that real in this session today, we'll actually show you an example of something like that project on a page at Hain Celestial. The same thing is true at the Hershey company. Again, previous webinar, actually pre-pandemic webinar, we had both Jeff Schmitz and Nate Forney from Hershey talk about their work in this area, and they said they made a very similar point to the level at which they've actually now got a project on a page in their system that eliminated their need for PowerPoint presentations in those meetings. Essentially, everybody pulls up these project on a page views that are right there in a very visual way to enable them to focus on the standard decision-making information that's needed for each gate decision. And that allows for, again, moving quickly and efficiently. It also allowed for them to have apples to apples comparisons, project to project, everybody focused on the same type of information to feed into that decision. In both cases, both for Hershey and also for Hain, this is part of a broader context of trying to move more in a more agile way. And by the way, there are other methods that they also incorporated into their process to move more quickly and to be more agile as a team as well. And we'll give you a quick example of that. In fact, to illustrate that, let me give it over to Arvo now to provide an example.